Muktifauj is an audiobook written by Frederick Booth-Tucker, a prominent figure in the Salvation Army. The title translates to Army of Liberation, reflecting the book's focus on the Salvation Army's mission and activities in India and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. Booth-Tucker, who was deeply involved in the organization's work in these regions, provides a detailed account of the challenges and triumphs faced by the Salvation Army over 40 years. The audiobook offers a rich historical perspective, highlighting the cultural and social impact of the Salvation Army's efforts to bring about spiritual and social change. It's a compelling listen for anyone interested in the history of the Salvation Army, missionary work, or the socio-religious landscape of India and Ceylon during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Come, let's get into the topic. Chapter 1. The Indian Empire. Thou thinkest, I am single and alone, I perceiving not the great Eternal Spirit who dwells within thy breast. Whatever wrong is done by thee, he sees and notes it all. Mahabharata. For the sake of those of our readers who may not be well acquainted with the British Empire in India, it may be desirable for me to preface the narrative which follows with some brief description of our field of work. Its extent. The British Empire in India and Ceylon extends over an area of about 1,900,000 square miles. In other words, it includes a territory larger than the continent of Europe without Russia, 13 times the size of Great Britain and Ireland, and more than 30 times the size of England. India proper is about 1,900 miles long and 1,900 miles broad in its extreme length and breadth. Starting from Bombay, it takes 42 hours of incessant traveling by rail to reach Calcutta, 43 to reach Lahore, 35 to reach Madras, and 56 to reach Tuticorin in the extreme south. By steamer to Colombo in Ceylon takes 3.5 days. To reach Ani in Kulu, our northernmost station in the Himalayas, will occupy at least 7 days. To reach our nearest core in Gujarat takes 12 hours by rail. The Himalaya Mountains or Snowy Range, Hinta means snow, which form the northern boundary of India, contain the 3 highest peaks in the world. The chief of these is Mount Everest, which is 29,000 feet above the level of the sea. India's plains are watered by many great rivers, such as the Indus, which is 1,800 nuls long, and the Ganges, which measures 1,600 miles, and whose sacred waters are fabled as flowing direct from heaven. Most of these rivers are worshipped, and their waters are supposed, at particular places, to be able to wash away the sins of those who bathe in them. Hinduism is remarkable for its elasticity and adaptivity. Hinduism has adapted itself to every nation and class with which it has come in contact, giving a religious sanction to the social distinctions which, with remarkable sagacity, it saw to be more or less inevitable, and throwing them, as it were, into a cast-iron mold, which the greatest reformers have vainly sought to break up. Instead of attacking Buddhism, it swallowed it wholesale and absorbed it into its system in a way which to Christians would, of course, be impossible. It has conquered its enemies by adopting boldly their leading tenets and thus robbing them of their distinctive power. A similar attempt to swallow Christianity and Mohammedanism is in these very days being made by the followers of the Brahmo, Arya, and other Samajs. The immense antiquity and success of Hinduism has been largely due to this genius for assimilation. In this way, it has taken the wind out of the sails of its adversaries, its self-support. By means of its system of endowments and begging, Hinduism supports the largest staff of religious ministers of any religion in the world, with an average of about 1 in 10 to the entire Hindu population. This makes it extremely difficult for any other religion to compete with them. The Hindu priest can beat all competitors out of the market for numbers and cheapness. The majority of them are content with the sky for their roof, a ragged loincloth for their clothing, the coarsest grain for their food, and water for their drink. Its versified scriptures and parabolic teachings are also admirably suited to the popular mind. Even its most intricate and subtle philosophies are embalmed in verse. Set to simple popular chants or lyrics, the religious teachings of the Hindu philosophers and saints are sung into the hearts of the people, or honeyed with parables and romantic tales. They are accepted wholesale without question. The great Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, is by far the longest poem that was ever composed, and leaves Homer and Virgil all together in the shade. At the same time, each county has its own favorite vernacular poets whose writings abound with the most admirable sentiments, couched in oriental imagery. The people naturally cling to these and despise the plain unvarnished utterances, which they are accustomed to hear from the generality of Christian tediers. The Indian Empire. Animist is a polite name for spirits, or demonolator. They call themselves devil worshippers. Their theory of religion is that God is good and will do nobody any harm. Therefore, it is unnecessary to worship him. The demons, on the other hand, are wicked and must be appeased, or they will cause some disease or other calamity. Hence, they practice openly the worst forms of demonolatry. Up to recent years, they have been included in the general term as Hindus, but the government now recognizes that this cult is really quite distinct. Moreover, the animists are excluded from Hindu temples. Their exact numbers are somewhat difficult to estimate. The census enumerators, in the districts where the animists are found, are mostly Hindus and are anxious to include under that term as large as possible a proportion of the population. It may, however, be reasonably reckoned that the animists and depressed classes are practically the same and that they number about 60 millions, though the census places the figures at much less. Mohammedanism. Mohammedanism ranks next in numbers to Hinduism. The simplicity of its creed accounts largely for its popularity and for its tenacity, where once it has taken root. The well-known Kalima, or Declaration of Faith, there is one God and Muhammad is his prophet, embodies all that anyone may need to know and believe in order to ensure him an entrance to heaven. Its simplicity is the very opposite of Hindu complexity and mystery. Everyone can understand and propagate the faith. Hence, every believer may, and to a large extent does, become a missionary. I have very seldom been in the society of Mohammedans without their making an effort to convert me to their religion. The rise of Christian missions. It is commonly believed that St. Thomas visited South India and planted the gospel on the western coast, finally crowning a life of successful work by a martyr's death. There appear to this day to be distinct traces of his work in the still numerous Syrian Church of Malabar, while a hill near Madras is well known as St. Thomas's Mount and is said to have been the scene of his martyrdom. Others of the apostles are supposed to have visited northern India, and evidence of their having done so may be gathered from some of the doctrines, ritual, and legends of Hinduism, which appear to be distinctly traceable to a Christian origin. Amulets are to this day commonly worn with Syrian and Hebraic hieroglyphics, which the wearers themselves cannot now explain. The forehead marks, so commonly used all over India, are also believed by some to be an abbreviation for Jehovah. Again, the idea of washing away sins as typified by baptism is commonly known and practiced by Hindus. From 1500 to 1600, 80 great efforts were made for the conversion of India by the Roman Catholics. Their priests penetrated boldly to the court of the great Mohammedan Emperor Akbar, who seems to have received them well. One of his sons is said to have become a convert and to have died a martyr's death. There are other no less remarkable traces of their work in the probable founder. Tyon of the two great Hindu dissenting sects of Kabiris and Sikhs, which sprang into existence about this time. There is some reason to believe that both these new religions were founded by priests in disguise. The originator of the Kabiris, knowing the instinctive hatred of foreign religions, transferred Jerusalem to Benares, gave the Savior an Indian name and in every possible way, and to a degree which we could not of course pretend to approve, Indianized Christianity. Al-Kabir is the Arabic for the Almighty.
Similarly, in Sikhism, which arose about the same time in the Punjab, there are many remarkable and more than accidental resemblances. They practice baptism and the Lord's Supper, and on their pictures are seen crosses, tongues of fire, fishes, and other symbols of Christianity. Of course, it must be remembered that in those times, the priests must have carried their hives in their hands. To go and settle in the court of Akbar must have been even more difficult and dangerous than it would be now to commence work in the court of the Emir of Afghanistan. Hence, the pioneer priests were careful to avoid everything that might serve to give unnecessary offense and adhered scrupulously to native customs. Their chief successes were, however, one in the south and especially along the coast, where they boldly claimed and received the protection and assistance of the King of Portugal at the time when the Portuguese were masters of the Indian Ocean. It is sufficient to mention the names of Saint Francis Xavier, Beshi, de Nobili, and Sancho Panza. Certainly for devotion and self-sacrifice, it would be difficult to find their equals. Beshi boldly penetrated to the center of the Tamil country, adopted a native name and dress, lived like a Brahmin, mastered the language, and wrote poems equaling the most celebrated compositions of the native authors. He wrote many books and accomplished single-handed results which have, perhaps, never been surpassed for magnitude. His work is the more remarkable that, unlike Xavier, he was cut off in a great measure from Portuguese support and was obliged to cast himself upon the Indians themselves. The first Protestant mission that entered the Indian field was that of the Danes in Tranquebar on the east coast. Ziegenhalg and Plutchow, their first two missionaries, landed in India in 1706, being sent forth by the King of Denmark and patronized by our own King George I, who did not consider it beneath his dignity to send them a letter of encouragement. In 1750, they sent out the famous Schwartz, who labored in the neighborhood of Tanjore for 48 years. So great was his influence with the natives that the Hindu Raja of Tanjore built him a church and assigned him a large piece of land on which to settle his converts. The church is still one of the sights of Tanjore, though it is kept closed, and only one Christian service is now permitted to be held in it every year.
It may naturally be asked how so gigantic a system of priesthood can possibly be supported. Probably at least one half support themselves by manual or clerical labor. The remainder are supported entirely by temple endowments or gifts of food and money. At the lowest computation, I should suppose that India supports directly 10 million religious teachers, whose sole employment is to preach their various tenets. In comparison with this, how insignificant must appear the entire force which Christianity is able to put into the field, and how earnestly we should pray that in this, the world's greatest and perhaps most hopeful harvest field, the Lord will be pleased to send forth a sufficiency of spirit-filled laborers to reap the golden soul sheaves that await their toil.